Hi, friends. This is Dorie Clark, and I am here with my good friend and colleague, Pete Mockaitis. And we are so excited to be here because we are LinkedIn Learning instructors. And as it happens, they recently announced last week the 20 top courses on the LinkedIn Learning platform. And we were lucky enough to both be included. Pete has a great course called Speaking Confidently and Effectively. And I actually had one called Interpersonal Communication and also my Strategic Thinking course that were in the top 20. So we are going to riff today. We'd love to answer your questions that you have and also just talk a little bit about our courses and the things that we've learned in the process of creating them. So Pete, it's awesome to have you here, man.
Oh, thanks, Dorie. Well, it's great to be here and a pleasure and an honor. And hello, LinkedIn Live.
Excellent. Well, Pete, the first question that I have for you. So you did this course. It was an interview actually that you did with a mutual friend of ours,
Yeah.
Diane DeResta, called Speaking Confidently and Effectively, which is pretty cool. And I'm wondering, and in fact, my cat is wondering as well.
That's a confident and effective cat.
He really is. He's extremely effective at being a cat. And he wanted me to ask you the question. If someone is just getting a few pointers, obviously, one of the cool things about LinkedIn Learning is that they have made these courses, the top courses, available for free over the course of between now and October 15th. So you can get Pete's course, Speaking Confidently and Effectively. You can get my course on interpersonal communications totally free. Just Google for them. You can find them and check them out, even if you're not a LinkedIn Learning subscriber. But if someone wanted to know a few just kind of top tips, what are the most important things that you need to know about being an effective communicator?
Oh, sure thing. Well, and you're right. I think the 80-20 rule applies here as it does to maybe most things. And perhaps the number one thing I'd recommend is really just take the time to prepare in terms of doing the homework, because Dorie, I don't know if it's your own experience in keynoting or preparing speeches, but I think I'm pretty brilliant in my own head. When I have a rough sense of what I want to say, it's like, oh yeah, that's good. And so, but sure enough, when I actually, for the first time, take it from thought world into spoken world, it's not that great. And I record it with maybe just the normal voice memos app on an iPhone or get the video. And you can say, oh, sure enough, that doesn't sound nearly as polished as it did just in my mind's eye or ear. So I think just taking the time to do that prep in terms of the basics. Who am I talking to? What do they really care about? What do they really need to know? And what are some key ways to articulate those key things that are succinct and effective works well. And I think a lot of times if we don't take the time to practice out loud and record and check it, it's easy to overestimate how solid we are. And I had one guest who mentioned, I said, hey, how much practice is enough? And of course, it'll vary based on, hey, how familiar are you with the material? How new is this? And all these factors. But if you just wanted a one size fits all answer, she gave me one. And it's 6 sticks. 6 times is a good number of times. And I think it really is about right in my own experience. And 6 times, I think, is more than most of us bother. But if you do, then you know it so well, you can really start paying attention to the bigger elements of what's going on, making eye contact. Are people engaged? Who's maybe a little skeptical? Like, you've got the content mastered so that you can pay attention to all the other things in the room.
I love it. I think those are great tips, Pete. Thank you very much. This is Dorie Clark, and I'm here with Pete Mockaitis. We are both LinkedIn Learning instructors, and we're talking today about how to communicate effectively. We both feel very fortunate that LinkedIn Learning recently announced the top 20 courses of the year, and that included my course on interpersonal communications and strategic thinking, and Pete's course on speaking confidently and effectively. Those courses are all available for free from now until October 15th. So go ahead and look them up on LinkedIn Learning. And even if you don't have an account, you can access them all for free. And if you want to learn more about Pete and his great work, he has a podcast. It's awesome at yourjob.com. if you would like to learn more about me and my work, and you can sign up, get some free self-assessments, and make sure you never miss one of these cool conversations, just go to dorieclark.com and you can sign up, get a free self-assessment, and you'll be added to our email list so you can get updates. Now, also, please feel free to type your name and where you are from into the chat box, because we'd love to say hi to you. I see Leanne is here. We have Janai is here. We have Hongzia Zhu. Hello, welcome. We have some great folks who are tuning in here. And Pete, we had a question come in from Francisco, and Francisco was curious. He wants to know, if you have trouble with a word, you're just like forgetting the word, what do you do? How do you move around that when you're like, I want to say a thing, but you totally can't get it? What's the plan in that circumstance?
Oh, sure thing. Well, I think one of the first things is just to have it's just a sense of a good humor about it. And in the course, Speaking Confidently and Effectively, Diane DiResta had a great tip there, which was to think in advance of your recovery phrase. Like if you're going to trip, you can say, well, hey, I know how to make an entrance. Or Oprah apparently tripped once and she just said, oh, wrong shoes. and so you're ready. So if you have a concern about forgetting a word or anything else, try to have a phrase ready in advance so that you can speak to that. Like, oh, words are not my friend today. Or I blame it on my 6-month-old who prevented all of us from sleeping. So if you just have your stock phrase or recovery strategy ready, but I'd also just want to put in your head that it could actually be kind of fun. I'm thinking I had an interview with Dr. Ethan Cross, who wrote a great book called Chatter. I highly recommend it. And we were talking about, he said, sometimes we think in words, and other times we think, in images. Imagistically, which is not a word. I think, he meant visually and I suggested visually. And we both had a laugh associated with it. And I think like if you're having fun and are calm and relaxed and can see the humor in it, then so too are those who are listening, as opposed to getting, tense and worked up and scared right along with you.
I think that's such a great point. And I think we've probably all been there, right? One of the things that I've really discovered when it comes to professional speaking and even non-professional speaking, but the kind of speaking we all have to do all the time. We're doing a webinar, we're presenting to colleagues. People are rooting for you, right? It is not in their interest for you to be a bad speaker. It's in everyone's interest for you to be a good speaker. And so they are cheering you on. Nobody wants to see you fail. They would much rather you succeed because it's a lot less boring for them. So I think that's the spirit of the room there.
Amen. Certainly.
Yes. So we have some wonderful folks who are tuning in. We wanted to say hi. So Francisco, who asked the great question, is here from Michigan. Janai, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, or maybe Janae, is from Brampton. Nikhil is here from Shimla. Leanne is from Missouri, the show me state. Yes. Chris is from New Jersey. Deborah's dialing in from North Carolina. Jeff is here from Friday Harbor, Washington. So good. Sarah's from Southern California. Kamel is from France. Nicole is here from Melbourne. Oh, this is fantastic. We've got Carlos, our faithful Carlos from Colombia. I love it. We've got Mickey from the Philippines. We've got Kelly from Boston. I love it. Thank you all for joining. If you're enjoying the conversation, please feel free to ask your questions to either me or Pete Mockaitis about communicating more effectively. And we look forward to taking your questions. And if you're enjoying it, hit the like button and hit the share button so that your friends can benefit from the conversation as well. Now, Pete, you have a podcast. You've been running it for many years. I feel fortunate that I've been a guest a couple of times. It's called How to Be Awesome at Your Job. Now, above and beyond the great insights about communication that you've gleaned from both your interviews with smart folks like Diane DiResta, what you've learned as a podcast host, I would love to hear, just at a macro level, having done this show for many years about business and best practices, what do you take from that? How are you different or better as a professional as a result of what you have learned from doing your own show?
Well, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because just recently I was talking with my wife and we had a communication with some, I don't want to call anybody out, but we had a communication about an issue in the realm of real estate with somebody. And I remember they were just sort of like matter of fact about, what they were saying. And I thought, wow, Just a few years ago, I would think that kind of communication is acceptable in terms of just sort of saying, hey, well, sorry that you feel sick or that there's a problem here, but, actually it's fine. And it's like, wow, that's just not right. It's sort of like I think it's sort of like the nuances, the gradations in terms of like word choices, in terms of like not saying obviously, because that can be really troubling if someone did not know that thing that you just said is obvious. That is sort of off-putting to them. Or this notion of psychological safety and the subtle ways that we can alienate people or not have folks feel heard, approved, validated, acknowledged. So I think that's sort of the big thing is like over time, this sense evolves like, that is a suboptimal communication and it's not up for debate. Like that's just very clear. And there's all these ways that we can take a communication from fine to masterful.
I love it. We all want to be masterful. It's so true. And a great question came in related to this, Pete, from Michael. And Michael wanted to know, what tips do you have for speaking extemporaneously, such as when you might be responding to a client's question, but you're not totally confident of what you want to say? You feel the pressure, right? You feel the ticking clock. The client is expecting something brilliant. You're trying to formulate it and say it at the same time. That can be a tricky situation for almost anyone. What would you recommend in that circumstance?
Well, first, it's great to hear from you, Michael, and you're excellent at speaking extemporaneously. So I don't know how much more I could share with you, but I think that to the extent that I guess this is almost cheating because it's not as extemporaneous when you've prepared, but when you're kind of spooked or not so confident, I think a core part of the prep is anticipating what is the spookiest question you might get, and then prepping that one really well, and then the next spookiest and the next. And this is great, I think, for interviews. I think it's good if you're going to have a tough meeting with a colleague or boss or client. And then as you just continually go through what's the hardest thing they could throw your way and prepare delivering it, then your confidence soars because you have got something to say for just about anything. And then as well as prep your phrase for, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to get it back to you and do that well. And frankly, if you do get back to them, most people don't. So you will impress them all the more, even though you didn't know it in the heat of the moment.
Well, that is the truth, and I've certainly seen that before. And when it comes to being improvisational with your speaking, I used to work in politics. I was a spokesperson on a number of political campaigns, including a presidential campaign. And what I really took from that, just about every successful candidate has what I will refer to as modules. And they will essentially mix and match the modules depending on their audience. So they're speaking to a bunch of college students. So they've got the education module and the, college loan module, and they've got the different things, whatever would be relevant to people in their early 20s. And similarly, they've got the senior citizen modules. So they mix and match all these things. And so if you over time can begin to work up essentially your own frequently asked questions, responses, so that you have modules in your back pocket, even if you don't know the answer to a particular question that you're asked, if you know the answer to a related question, you can essentially fall back on that and say, I'm not sure specifically about that instance, but what I do know is X, Y, Z. And you can go into that module, and it actually is a relatively seamless transition where people will not hold it against you that you don't know that piece, because you obviously know something about the issue in a substantive way. So great question, Michael, and thanks for asking that. So I'm Dorie Clark, and I'm here with Pete Mockaitis. We are both LinkedIn Learning instructors, and we are celebrating together the fact that we have been fortunate enough that our courses, Pete has a course called Speaking Confidently and Effectively. I have two courses, Interpersonal Communication and Strategic Thinking, that are in the top 20 of LinkedIn's courses for the year. All these are available for free, and you can get them for free, even if you're not a LinkedIn Learning subscriber, through October 15th. If you want to learn more about how to do that and to be in touch with us, go to dorieclark.com, sign up for a free self-assessment. You can get all the goods, figure out all the stuff that's going on, Pete's website and the name of his podcast is awesomeatyourjob.com. So please feel free to type your name into the chat box. Let us know where you're calling in from. We see Becky's here from Dallas, Sean's from Iowa, Beryl's here from London. We've got Ione from St. Kitts. This is great. Julio is here from Guadalajara, Esther from Nairobi, Richard's here from Durham. I love this. Suresh from Auckland, Michelle from Vancouver, Lakeisha from North Carolina, Gary from Toronto. We're so happy to have all of you guys and more. Now, Pete, a great question came in from Mickey, who's in the Philippines. Mickey wants to know, how do we overcome fear or anxiety about communicating if we have a language gap, if we're not speaking our native language? This is obviously a tricky situation because you might sort of be translating in your head as you're doing it, or maybe fumbling for the exact right word that you're looking at and looking for. So what would you recommend?
Well, that's a good one. And I think that ideally folks will sort of understand the state of affairs in advance, as opposed to being surprised, like, oh, I thought that you were a native speaker and that I would have that. And then again, when it comes to the prep, I would say, think about, are the stakes high enough, such that it might be prudent to have an interpreter translator sort of present in there. And there are times and places where that is indeed the scoop. In terms of anxiety, I think part of it is just sort of knowing what the other person is really thinking. And I can tell you, Dorie, I think you'd back me up on this. When speaking with people who are not native English speakers, like, I am never thinking vicious, judgmental thoughts. It's just like, like, I am so frustrated and annoyed at how you're doing poorly here. So like, that just hasn't entered my world. And I think that is the case, Dorie. Would you back me up here with most kind-hearted professionals across the board? So I think sometimes that discomfort is largely an internal perception, as opposed to a reality that is there. And sometimes, frankly, I even find it quite charming when folks are non-native English speakers and they're saying it in the way that is comfortable and makes sense for them. Can actually help me look at the issue in a different way. Sort of how studies of problem solving talk about restating the problem using different words can illuminate different pathways for solutions. So I hope that's helpful in terms of your own perception of things, is that being a non-native English speaker could actually be an asset in that can reframe some things and how we say things to make them appeal or open up new possibilities.
I love that perception. I think that's really nuanced, Pete. So thank you for sharing that. I love it. And I think also the thing we have to keep in mind, Mickey, especially if you're dealing with Americans, I will just I'll just say it flat out. Pretty much none of us speak another language, and we are ashamed. We are horrifyingly ashamed. So essentially, it's the best way possible to get a compliment, to fish for a compliment. You say, "Oh, I just want to say up front, I'm very sorry. If I occasionally miss a word because English is not my native language, and so sorry." And literally every American in the room is going to be like, oh, you speak such good English. I'm so impressed. Oh my God. I took French for 13 years and I can't speak French. Not that I'm referring to myself at all. And so anyway, I think you can actually take advantage of just the horror and shame that most Americans have at our inability. So props to you for your guessing English and Tagalog. So score Mickey.
So, I love that, Dorie. And if I could echo that, I think that is sort of like a master key to many situations that we're afraid of, is to just share some upfront context about what expectations can be and should not be, whether it's with English being not your first language or any number of things. And then rather than it's like hoping the shoe doesn't drop or you're not outed at some point, it's like, oh, well, I've already covered that right up front, so I don't have to worry about that at all.
Absolutely. That is right on. Love it. Well, a great question came in. There's so many wonderful comments here. I see the lovely note from Janai. Thank you so much. We're so glad that you are enjoying the courses and finding that valuable, cheering you on. And a wonderful question came in from Arti. Arti wants to know, how do you develop the art of storytelling? Some people seem to just do it effortlessly. But if you are not one of those people, Pete, if you are somebody who needs to study it and learn the process, what are your best tips about how someone can become a better and more effective storyteller? What would you say to them?
Well, the first thing I'd say to them is I don't think they are doing it effortlessly. It just looks like they're doing it effortlessly because they are so practiced and polished. And so that's the how I think about that first and foremost. And then secondly, I think that you can do some really good learning associated with stories and what is it that captivates you and why, in terms of if it's a novel, if it's a series on Netflix, if it's a favorite movie, kind of what gets you going there. And you can sort of start to see what does it. And often it's just boils down to some fundamental principles, like it's a relatable character or situation. There is a bit of a conflict or a mystery or something that is not yet known. Like you're sort of wondering, what's going to happen? Are they going to prevail over this circumstance? And then we have a little bit of tension there that then resolves. And I think a lot of times we don't need to put too much pressure on ourselves with a story. Sometimes the story can just be like, hey, there was a customer who was upset with us. They gave us a call and they said, hey, where's my order? I thought it was supposed to be here 2 weeks ago. And that's enough to get a lot of people to relate to. Oh yeah, we've been that customer, and we've been the people who've disappointed others who were counting on us, and they're already a little bit hooked. It was like, well, and so then let's just hear, what happened and how did it resolve, and hopefully there's a point or a takeaway associated with. And so therefore, let's always make sure to follow these processes to delight our customers or whatever. And that's my take. What do you think, Dorie?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I love that, Pete. I'll also just add that one technique that I often suggest to my executive coaching clients is to create a story bank. And what I mean by that is, in the moment, as we're coming up with a speech or a presentation, we might say, "Oh, I wish I had some stories," but when you need them, that's of course is when you don't have them. So what I like to say is, if something interesting happened to you, and let's be clear, this is a relatively low bar for interesting. It's not like, oh my god, and it was my long lost mother. Like, it doesn't have to be like that. It can really be as simple as like, oh, that time the customer called and was angry, but then Jenna did XYZ and it made it okay, or whatever the thing is. But if it's somehow relevant to your topics or relevant to what you discuss, write it down. Just write down that story. Say, oh, this is a perfect example of what good customer service looks like, or this is a perfect example of bad customer service. It can be things that happened to you, things you saw, whatever, but write it down in a document, like even just a Word document, create a file on your computer. And then that way, if you're grouping it under different categories, oh, here's a story about effective networking or ineffective networking, whatever. When it's time for you to come up with a presentation, you will then have that resource that you can grab, and it becomes much easier. So I think that's one possibility. So many wonderful questions coming in. Thank you. Keep them coming, guys. We're going to be here for another 7 minutes or so. And again, this is Dorie Clark. I'm here with Pete Mockaitis. We're both LinkedIn learning instructors, and we feel fortunate that our courses have been among the top 20 of LinkedIn's courses of the year. Pete's course is called Speaking Confidently and Effectively. I had a course called Interpersonal Communication. They were all part of the top 20. You can get them for free. Just type them into LinkedIn Learning search engine or Google, and you can access them for free until October 15th. So we're very excited about that. So, Pete, a wonderful question came in from the Netherlands. Susan wants to know, she says, what if you're speaking on a panel on Zoom and you disagree with all the other speakers regarding the launch of their white paper? Not that there's a specific example that we're talking about at all here. She says, how to disagree appropriately without vehemence, even if you feel passionately. Susan, we have been there. We totally relate. Okay, you want to throttle these people on Zoom, Pete. It's a bad idea. The launch of the white paper, they're getting it all wrong. What do we do? How do we get our point across but keep it contained?
Oof, That's now talk about stories. Like, this is riveting. I'm putting
Yes,
myself in that position and I'm going, like, you got the making of a great story right there.
you do,
And it's
Susan.
normal real life. Well, I think first and foremost, it may sound obvious, but I'd say I'd like to establish just a few just kind of ground rules, just always in terms of how I speak to people and audiences. And so if you have sort of no profanity, no name calling, so just so the basics, because I think it is possible to disagree strongly and passionately without saying that they're an idiot, the research is stupid, etc., and those sorts of things. So I would just recommend that. And you might even, I think we talked about earlier with regard to the non-native English speaking situation, is to share the context up front and say, well, hey, panels are valuable because we get a diversity of perspectives. And I'm actually coming at it from a different point of view. I think that there are several concerns that have yet to be validated in this research, particularly A, B, C, and D. Under A, it's this. Under B, it's that. And so there you have it. You let them know, it's like, hey, that's why panels are good. I've got a different perspective here, and here it is. And then that's okay. And hopefully everyone will maintain decorum, and it can result in an enriching conversation in which some more truth and nuance emerges, as opposed to a shouting fest.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think is always good advice, Pete. If we can avoid being aggressive to the point where the other people get defensive, that is optimal. We want to try to keep it in the realm of ideas. So what I'll add to Pete's great point is, if there's something that you like about it, it's always good to fixate on that first and then pivot. Oh, Pete, I really liked what you said about blah, blah, blah in the white paper. That made a lot of sense. I wanted to mention that I'm not sure I agree about the timing of the release of the white paper. I'm a little concerned that blah, 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 blah. And okay, also, Susan, just to make it clear, Pete and I are also using American vernacular. Like, if you're Dutch, you actually probably can say this is stupid. Dutch love to do that. You wouldn't want to do it if you're American. So depending on who you're talking to, just to do that. The Dutch are very blunt, but generally you could say, I have some concerns about X, Y, and Z, and I just wanted to play this out. If this were to happen, then I'm worried that blah, 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 blah might happen. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that's a risk? Do you have thoughts about how we might mitigate that risk? And then you can sort of take it from a collaborative position. So lots of good possibilities there. So love that. And I also just wanted to take the opportunity to mention, as we are coming close to being at a close, that of course, the best way to find out about Pete and his terrific work and podcast, go to his website. It's awesomeatyourjob.com. And the thing that I'm most excited about right now is I have a book. It's called The Long Game, and it is launching 1 week from tomorrow. Oh my goodness. You can actually download a free long game strategic thinking self-assessment. Anyone can get it for free at dorieclark.com/thelonggame. And you can also pre-order this guy. It is available for pre-order on all of the book sites where one can buy books. So we're very excited to have you here and joining us. And Pete, one more question. I think we probably have time for one more. Jeff had a terrific question that he was asking. He said, I have trouble with circuitous thought. What advice do you have in simplifying or distilling your ideas? If you feel like you know what you want to say, but oh my gosh, it's a little amorphous in your mind. It's taking you 10 hours to get there. You want to simplify it. What should you do? Do you have advice?
Oh, sure thing. I recommend making a bit of a checklist questionnaire that you can just go through anytime and every time in order to clarify. One thing I use, I call it DETPRAM, short for determine the parameters, which is a little acronym for. Usually in collaborative communications, sort of, hey, what is the deliverable? What is the timing? What is the process? What are the resources? What is the audience? What is the motive? And I'm trying to tick these boxes and get clear on what am I trying to achieve here. I had a great podcast guest, Ethan Becker, who said,
do you only have Ethans on your podcast?
Only Ethans. That's the rule. And Dorie. Ethans and Dorie is To know if you have a point, check this out. Say, I believe that blank, or I believe we should blank. And can you fill in the blank? And so if you say, my presentation is about podcasting, that's not really a point yet. Like, podcasting is the future. Podcasting builds audience. Okay, that's a point. So I think that's a good little rule of thumb, is like, do I have a point? And how do I want people to act differently as a result of having this conversation? What do I want to be different in the world after having had this exchange? And I think as you tick through those questions, clarity kind of emerges through some iteration. Like, this is really what this is all about. Aha. And then stick with that, and then maybe try to use fewer words.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much, Pete. And thank you, Jeff, for that question. We're just about at time, and wanted to say thank you to all of you for joining. Kristen had a question, which I'll have to leave you with an exciting cliffhanger here. Kristen says, how do you deal with people who interrupt you? Kristen, the great news. Oh, my goodness. Not to dangle it too much, but in my course, Interpersonal Communication, you can find an entire module on that, and you can get it for free thanks to LinkedIn until October 15th. So check out the Interpersonal Communication course. There's a whole thing on how to deal with those pesky interrupters. And make sure to check out Pete's course, which is called Speaking Confidently and Effectively. Again, if you want to learn more about Pete Mockaitis, check him out and his cool podcast at awesomeatyourjob.com. And if you want to find out more about all the things that I do, and also my new book, oh my gosh, coming out in 1 week, go to dorieclark.com/thelonggame, and you can download a free long game strategic thinking self-assessment that I hope you will enjoy, about applying strategy to your life and your career. Pete, is there anything else that you would like to make sure to tell these kind people?
Well, I think Dorie is a pro, and it was fun to be in your capable hands during this LinkedIn Live interview. I hope that folks do check out the courses and see the goods that Dorie and Diane DeResta and the other, there's 20 of them. Check them all out. Peruse the list and see what you dig. And yeah, thanks, and keep on learning. That's a key part of the long game. I think you'd agree, Dorie.
Absolutely. All right, amazing folks. Good to have you here. And again, if you enjoyed the conversation, please hit the like button and the share button so your colleagues can benefit from this conversation as well. I'm Dorie Clark. We've been here with Pete Mockaitis, and we will see you later on the internet, and hope you enjoy checking out our courses. Take care.
Bye-bye.